Tonight's guest is a creator of fantasy worlds and peak moments. He is the co-founder of the Florence Academy of Art in Gothenburg, serving as its academic director for 10 years. Later, he swapped painting for the drawing pad and gaming industry. Joakim Ericsson, welcome to the Cave of Palace.
Thanks for having me.
Now, we have an overarching topic for the evening. What constitutes good storytelling? We'll consider this through looking at your earlier work in oil, like The Burning Horse, and of course considering your background at the Florence Academy through academic painters such as Bouguereau, but also Odd Nerdrum, with whom you've studied.
Yeah.
And I know that your current digital work and the work of other illustrators will also help clarify and give us an answer.
Yeah.
Which will bring us to the archetypical qualities of fantasy and science fiction like Star Wars, and to the differences between the modern and the classical hero.
It's quite a journey, isn't it?
It is. But first, we want to know a little bit about you. You're a digital painter now. What is your work? What's your everyday life now?
Yeah, I'm a combination of, I'm a concept artist and I'm working...
That's quite ironic.
Yeah. I'm a concept artist working in the gaming industry, right. And I also do illustrations on the side. So I'm a sort of concept artist illustrator. I mean, those two fields are quite close together, but they're a little bit differentiated.
So what is a concept artist? Because we're not talking about conceptual art.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a concept artist is basically someone who gets the task to visualize a project. So it could be a game, or it could be a movie, or something like that. And basically someone has an intellectual, maybe not intellectual, but has a very, in a way, clear idea of what the project needs to be.
Right.
But they might not know what the project is going to look like visually.
Okay.
So the question is then, okay, what's everything going to look like? What are the environments going to look like? What are the characters going to look like? What's going to be the type of lighting? What's going to be the type of mood that we're going to have in this project? And a concept artist working together with the art director is basically responsible for creating these, basically visualizing the whole world in the project.
Right. And so this example then, what is this for? What did you do this for a game or for?
No, this is. I mean, the thing is also with the concept art world is that it's very competitive. So you constantly just have to practice and get better and try new things.
Right.
It's not a job that I would recommend to anyone who just wants to work 9 to 5.
Okay.
And then you watch movies or read books or whatever for the rest of the time. It's very competitive. So you constantly have to like practice, because there's also it covers such a huge field. There's so many things, and a lot of people specialize on just doing one certain type of work. And then you have other people like me who I try to diversify what I do. So I like to do environments and characters and keyframes, which in storytelling is very crucial. Like keyframe is a sort of, you depict a scene. I think the term you use is a peak moment. Right. Where it's something that's like the most important, sort of like concentrate. It's basically a scene where everything gets really, really concentrated, and that's why it's called a key frame, because it's a key moment in the whole story.
Okay, and a frame as in a frame in a movie.
Yeah, exactly. So frame is basically the movie frame. Yeah.
Right.
So there's so many things you can do, and I like to do as much as possible. Yeah. Not as much as possible, but I like to do probably have a wider range of tasks than most people do.
Right. Where did this interest come from? I mean, were you always interested in sort of fantasy, sci-fi, these things?
There was one thing that happened when I was 5 years old that I think definitely, I would say, sparked my enthusiasm for science fiction and fantasy for the rest of my life. And that was in 1977 when the first Star Wars hit.
Right.
Hit Sweden.
So tell us about the cathartic moment.
Yeah, it was very strange because And people, you know, I think it's hard for, just as it's hard for people to remember a world without internet. In the sci-fi world and the fantasy sort of genre, I think it's also very hard to imagine a world before Star Wars.
Right.
Because there was nothing like it really before. Even though, I mean, George Lucas, when he made it, he based a lot of his storytelling and the characters and, you know, some basic elements he based on maybe like Flash Gordon, early stuff.
Wow.
But just visually and also in terms of, you know, the emotional impact and the seriosity of it. Nothing came like nothing. You know, most people hadn't seen anything close to that. And I remember I was 5 years old, and it was on the Swedish news, and my mother said, "Oh, you should watch this now. It's about this new American movie that's coming out. You know, that's taking the world by storm." And then they showed the first scenes. I think it was one or two scenes from Star Wars, and it starts with those big spaceships flying through space. The rebels are being hunted by the Empire. And eventually they get caught by the Empire, and then the stormtroopers weld through the doors, and they break through the door, and they start killing everyone, all the rebels, and the princess is running away trying to hide, and then through the door comes the silhouette of Darth Vader.
Right.
And in that moment, my life was changed. I was completely mesmerized. I was obsessed with it, and I drew Darth Vader, I drew stormtroopers for years and years and years. And from then on, I was like, I preferred living in that fantasy world than to live in the real world.
Right.
Yeah.
But then you went to art school at some point, right?
Yes, it was the first time I went, because the thing was, I was always drawing, but being in Sweden, also in the days before internet, I basically had no idea that you could you know, be an illustrator as a profession. And I knew there were artists though, because my dad used to collect paintings basically. So we would go to all the auction houses in Sweden, and he would buy paintings not just as investments. I mean, investment was part of it, but it was also like he wanted to have good images on the wall. So I was exposed to quite a bit of those like auction catalogs. Right. Which is basically like this big catalog with just hundreds of images. And you can sit there and go through all of them, you know, and it's basically a gold mine for just looking at art.
It's great because it's not chosen by an art historian, so it's not sort of a politically correct.
Exactly, yeah.
History of the development, so-called.
Yeah. It's basically, we have all these paintings. Yeah. Who wants to buy them?
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, it's everything you can imagine, right? Mm. But anyway, so after my teenage years, I did my military service, which was a very depressing year. My career in the military was very, well, it just wasn't for me. So the year after that, I think my parents, who forced me to complete my military service because I wanted to drop out because I was so miserable. But they convinced me to finish it. So I said, okay, I'll do that. But then I think they sort of felt guilty for making me do that because they could see that I wasn't doing, like I was really suffering through that year. So what they did, they enrolled me in an art school the year after. So when I was finished with my military service, they basically said, we applied to an art school for you. Somehow they could do that because the school did not take work samples. What do you call it?
Drawings or whatever.
Yeah, like you didn't have to send in a portfolio of your work. Yeah. So they could basically just like list my name and say, okay, he wants to go there. And then I got this position in this art school. And it was called Konstskolan i Stockholm, so the art school in Stockholm. Right. So it was one of those 1 year preparatory educations for anyone. So it's basically, you can say like a beginner school for artists. I think it was an okay school, even though obviously in Sweden in those days there was no place really where you could study to really learn how to draw and how to paint, because almost no one knew how to do that. I mean, it was a tradition that was lost. But I have to say, this school, at least it was free in the sense that they let you paint the way you wanted, and they also let you try all these different fields in art. So we got to do, you know, we did model drawing, we did self-portraits, We did sculpture, we did photography, we even did copying. So one teacher actually, we had 1 week of copying, which is obviously a week is not a lot of time if you want to copy Leonardo da Vinci, which is what I did. But at least I got to do prepare the canvas the old way with the rabbit skin glue and use the tempera and build things up in layers and glazing at the end.
You did that at National Museum then, or?
No, I just got a big poster for it. Because I think at the time there was a Leonardo da Vinci exhibition that had been shown in Stockholm, and that painting was in that show. So I got a good quality poster from that exhibition. So I did that for a year, and then I realized, okay, this is something I really want to do, because it was a very stimulating year, and I was working very hard, and I wanted to get better. But the problem was after that, like, where do you go after that? And obviously, I thought being 20 or 21 years old, you're very naive, you know nothing about the world. So my idea was that I was going to go to the Royal Art Academy in Stockholm.
Okay.
Because I thought that's where you go to learn how to paint. Obviously, I didn't know then what I know now, so it's kind of cute that I thought that would be the solution. So I spent then basically 3 or 4 years in Stockholm, not knowing what I should do, because I was applying to all these schools, but I didn't get accepted anywhere. And it was a very confusing time. It was very frustrating, because finishing the art school that I did, the year that I did the art school in Stockholm, coming out of that, my self-confidence was actually quite high, because I thought, I can actually do this, because I was looking at what everyone else was doing.
Which was much worse.
Yeah. So my stuff was bad, but it was among the best that was being done in a realistic sense. So those years were extremely frustrating. I didn't get in anywhere. I was living with my girlfriend in an apartment, and I was trying to paint, on the side, like in the evenings, and trying to learn things. And the thing is, teaching yourself, just looking in books, I mean, you get some progress, obviously it's not completely fruitless to do that, but it's very slow, because you have to make all the mistakes, and there's no one that can sort of like set you on the right path.
Right.
So you have to like try everything like a blind person almost, and just search your way through it. And then all of a sudden you find something that works. Okay, at least that works. But then you keep working, and then you make more mistakes. So it's a very time-consuming process.
Right, and this is the age before the internet, so.
Yes, which it's hard for kids these days, I think, to understand how it was, because these days, let's say when I came out of art school, if internet would have been around, I could just type in classical realist painting art school, and I would get probably hundreds of thousands of hits, or at least thousands of hits, and just start to go through them. But in those days, there was if no one told you about it, or if you didn't like accidentally stumble upon it, there was no way you could know about it. And there was a school in the world that existed, but there was no way for me of knowing about it.
Right.
So instead, what I ended up doing was, there was a job in the library in the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Stockholm, and I think it's also important to say that the academy in Stockholm, it used to be the school, but it's not a school anymore. It's a museum. So they separated the museum and the exhibition and the archive part basically from the school. So the art university, like the Stockholm Royal Art School, is separated from the academy. So the academy is more sort of like a building for exhibitions and archives and old works. And they also have a library, and I worked in that library for 1 year, going home every night, painting, trying to figure things out on my own. And working in the library, the benefit of that was sitting there, and people would return books every day. So you would file the books and you put them on the shelf. And one day I saw this, there was a big dark cover of a book, and it said Odd Nerdrum. And then it was written by Jan-Ove Tuv. And the image that was on the front was the two twins, these two female twins.
Sleeping bags.
Yeah, in the sleeping bags, exactly. And I saw the cover and I said, wow, this is very nice. I've never seen this before, because it had this sort of like Rembrandt, Caravaggio-esque look. So I was like, oh, I got to look into this. So instead of filing it and just putting it away on the shelf, I started going through it. And I would see all these like amazing paintings, like self-portraits and all the portraits and multi-figurative works. And I was completely blown away. And I said, why haven't I heard of this guy? I mean, this is amazing. And then I started looking at the text, because I wasn't reading the text, I was just looking at the images.
Right.
And then I started seeing the text, underneath the picture. And then it said something like, I can't remember exactly which painting, but it was said, painting so-and-so. And then it said the date, 1985. And I was like, what? This is a guy that is alive today? And that was another moment. That was like the Star Wars moment, or the role-playing game moment. That was like, I was completely blown away, because I thought I was the last idiot left on earth who wanted to work in this way, because I didn't know about the illustrator tradition in America, for instance.
Okay.
I didn't know about either. So this book.
Did it really pause on that? I mean, basically you were feeling really quite lonely.
Extremely lonely.
The things you were admiring weren't being taught, I guess you figured out at the academy. Yeah, and it was a very confusing time, because you're young, and when you're young, you believe in authority, and you believe that everyone who's older than you knows better than you. At least I was that way when I was 20. Right. So to find this book was an extremely, it was like lightning striking, striking you right in the head. And as soon as I saw that, so what I did is that, because obviously I could borrow the books as well. Right. So as soon as I got back, I said, okay, I'm gonna borrow this book, and I brought it home, and I was going home every night, studying that book and trying to paint self-portraits in Odd Nerdrum's sort of style. Some of them are still left. Not all of them are destroyed, and at some point I could show you them so you can laugh a little bit, but yeah, but at least in my little like bubble, then I thought I was making progress. So. Yeah, well, suddenly there's hope. Yeah, all of a sudden there's hope. Exactly. Yeah. Well, did you apply to him at that time? Or? No, I was. The thing was, I saw his work, and it was such a. The imagery was so striking, and I could tell right away that this is a person. How should I put it? It's not a person whose opinion I would take lightly. So I was actually too scared to contact him. Also, I didn't know how to contact him. I guess maybe I could have found the yellow pages for Norway or something like that. But I was actually too scared, and I just realized, okay, I'm going to contact this person one day, and try to figure out if I can study with him. But first I have to get better. Like I need to get the bar up higher, so the quality of my work is actually good enough to apply. To have the basic handcraft. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, get the eyes in the right place and. Yes. Yeah. Not making the head too big in the figure, or So that was the plan. Yeah. Did you at that time, could you see the faults of your own paintings, or did you just understand that you had to learn more? It's kind of funny how I don't know if it's when you're young, because the thing is, being naive can be good and it can be really bad. Because the good thing about being naive is that you're not afraid to, take a step. Right. Being naive can actually move you forward, because this is going to work out. If you're not naive, then there's a big chance that you will just, there's no way in hell this is never going to happen. So you basically quit before you even started. So I'm ashamed to say it, but in my naive bubble that I was living in then, looking at some of my paintings and putting like Odd's book next to them, I would actually say, it's not too far off. But obviously when I see it today, they were quite a bit far off. But yeah. So anyways, you don't apply. Yeah. But no. So what happens? You go back to working in the library?
Yeah, so I was working in the library in the Royal Academy, and it was a nice place to work. Like the people around there were very, very nice, very knowledgeable. You know, so even though I wasn't painting there, I learned a lot, and also obviously I got an understanding of the history of the academy. You know, and I could walk around. I can look at all the cast work. They have an amazing cast collection, and actually, well, you would call it probably a sculpture collection. You know, so there's a lot of stuff to benefit from working there. And like I said, my colleagues were really good. But I knew that this was just a time for me, like trying to figure out how to solve this. Like I have to study with Odd Nerdrum at some point. And also after I stopped working in the library and I started working as what do you call it? Like sort of like a handyman. So I was like hanging exhibitions.
Janitor or?
Yeah, sort of a janitor, but I wasn't cleaning, but I was like hanging pictures and stuff, like so, like practical work, like the walls needed painting or whatever, I would do that. But I was also responsible for sorting the mail, because we would get this company mail every day, and I would go to the post office with a big bag, and I would just take like all the packages and letters in a bag, and I would bring it to work, and then I would start sorting them. Okay, this is for the curator, this is for the so-and-so, this is for the library. And as I was going through this, again, just by accident, I come across a flyer from the Florence Academy.
Right.
Because Florence Academy had sent a flyer to the Royal Academy, and they thought it was a school, obviously, because if you don't know how the system was with the academy and the school in Stockholm, you would think that the academy was a school.
Right.
So I think Florence Academy sent their flyer. I think it was a flyer and a poster, and they sent it to the academy because they were maybe hoping like they could get some more students. You know, that if they wanted to study the classical training, that they could go to the Florence Academy. So I was standing there basically, and I got the flyer and the poster, and it even had like an application form on it.
Really?
Yeah. So I was standing there and I said like, oh my God. And I started looking through the folder and I was like, oh my God, this is really good. Like I was looking at like portraits and still lifes and figure work and drawings and cast drawings. Basically, the work I saw in the Florence Academy folder was the work very similar to the ones I admired that was in the archives in the academy.
Right.
Because in the academy, you know, you could basically just like pull out the drawer and you would have like the cast drawings by Zorn, for instance. So
because he studied this basically the same way or quite similar.
It was a quite similar way, yeah. Eventually he got fed up with the academy system, so Zorn was actually a dropout. Like he didn't finish the academy. He was too good. He had too much skill and maybe ego. I don't know. But I could see that these images were very, very close to the 19th century work that I admired, because I mean my favorite work has always been late 19th century and 17th century painting.
Right.
So like basically Rembrandt, and in the 19th century the sort of Zorn, obviously also the pre-Raphaelites and those sort of painters. Right. And I could see right away that the Florence Academy, okay, if this is what they're doing there, this is the only place I know about where I can go and learn what I need to learn, basically.
That must have been quite a decisive moment then. It
was very decisive. It was a little bit of a mess, because by haphazard they wanted to open up a classical training school also in Stockholm at the time, and I applied.
At that time?
Yeah, exactly at the same time. So all of a sudden there was a school that was called Nathanael Beskov that was going to open up, and it was also a classical training school, but it was just a 1 year, a maximum 2 year education. And I applied there because the thing is, I wanted to go to Florence because I could see, okay, this is a place where you can really learn something. But at the same time, I was living in a relationship with a girl, an amazing woman who I loved, and I knew that she didn't really want to move abroad. So you have all these practical things, right, in life. So I applied to the school in Stockholm, and I got in. So then my plan was to go to the Nathanael Beskov school, and the application process went through in the summer, and they said like, yeah, you can start in the fall. You know, your application work looks really good. And so I was excited about it. And then I got a phone call, I think maybe late summer or something. And so like, yeah, hello, this is me. I'm the director for the Nathanael Beskov school. Yeah, you know, the thing is that the government is not going to grant us the student loan program for our school. So the school is cancelled.
Oh my God.
So the school never opened. The plan was to open this school, but then they were denied the student funding and the student loan.
That's some blow.
Yeah. So the school was cancelled. It never opened. And then
what went through your mind?
Yeah. So then again, first of all, I felt sorry for them, you know, because the guy who called me up seemed like a really genuine and nice person. And he was excited to start this school. So then all of a sudden I was in limbo again. And then I went home and I told my girlfriend, listen, the school that I got accepted to has been cancelled. It's not going to happen. So my only chance now is to actually go to Florence Academy. I mean, I could tell that Florence Academy was probably a safer bet if you wanted to learn something.
Right. Okay.
But I wasn't that keen on moving abroad. But then she said, you know, if this is really what you need to do, then we'll move down there. So she, you know, yeah, very, very nice of her. So we actually moved to Florence in the fall of '98.
Right.
Yeah.
And how long did you stay there then?
I stayed for 3 years because the program was 3 years.
Right. Yeah. So tell us about that. I mean, what is the purpose of the education? What do you learn throughout those 3 years?
Yeah, I would say the easiest way to explain the Florence Academy, if you want to call it a method, which I think you can do. I think you can call it a method because it's a practical sort of philosophy of like how do you accomplish good realism, and it's the old word, you know. In any art school, you will hear this. Oh, you have to learn how to see. You have to learn how to see. But learning how to see can mean a lot of different things. I mean, learning how to see it's just like it's a cliche word, I think. But I think at the Florence Academy, actually what they do is that they actually do they teach you how to see.
Yeah.
Because it's a very sort of strict curriculum that they have. And and in the beginning, it's very based on accuracy. It's all about accuracy. It's not about, oh, look at the energy in your drawing and things like that. I mean,
okay.
They don't dislike if you have energy in your drawings, but they're not going to critique you on it.
Right. Okay.
They only critique you, okay, is it accurate or not? So the first part of
really a secure capture of the form.
Super secure captures. You have to nail the drawing by a fraction of a millimeter, and you have to nail the values, and you have to nail the halftones, and you have to nail the edges.
Right.
So yeah.
So this is the first year, and what, like you do copies of Borg.
Charles Borg, yeah. So
he's an academic painter, 19th century.
Yeah, 19th century, exactly. Right. And he actually, as far as I know, he made these lithographs as a sort of template curriculum. What do you call it? Like, not props, but it's basically material that you can use to teach art students. So he did these like lithographs, which are basically, so it's a drawing. I mean, it's a lithograph, but it looks like drawings, and it's all of classical sculptures. So you have anything from like a simple shape, like a hand. A hand is not a simple shape, maybe, but you go from like smaller, simpler shapes, and then for every project, because you have to do at least like 5 bark drawings, they become more and more complex. Right. So then eventually, maybe it's a face. Like one that a lot of people do, for instance, is the face of Aristotle.
Right.
With all the hair and everything. And everything has to be super accurate. It's like you don't get any leeway whatsoever. It's like if there's a little curl on the beard.
So it's 1-to-1.
It's 1-to-1, yeah. And basically when they come up and check how accurate you are, they take a plumb line and they just stretch out the plumb line and they just measure directly on the drawing. Mm. And they can say like, look at this is a millimeter off, and then you have to move it, So it's really, really forcing you to learn how to see.
So does this relate then to the concept of sight size, or?
Yeah, it's a good introduction to sight size as well. I can go through what sight size means. So sight size is basically, if I would make a portrait of you, for instance, then I would paint you or draw you the exact same size as I see you from my point of view.
Yeah, right.
So I have a what's it called, vantage point, where you stand and you look. So if I wanted to make a life-size portrait of you, I would put the canvas right next to your head.
Okay.
So you would sit there and
the
pose.
optical effect on you.
So yeah, I have you there, and I have the canvas right next to it, and the canvas is approximately on this level, you know. So some of your face is in front of the canvas, and the rest of your head is behind the canvas.
Right.
And then you step away, and then you look at it from maybe like 3 or 5 meters, and I just compare the image that I'm producing of you, and I'm comparing it to you directly.
Right.
And the Borg work is preparatory work for that, because the Borg is flat, and then you put your drawing right next to it, and then you step away, and you sort of just use eye measure, you know, to see how close you can get.
Right.
And then so in the Florence Academy, you start with the bar drawings, and you do that half the day, and then you draw the figure half the day, because it's constantly figure work. Like, so you draw
with live model.
Live model,
From the beginning.
From the beginning, from day one, yeah. So you do half the day model, and then half the day you do the bargs, and then when you're finished with the bargs, when basically your barg work is good enough that it seems like you have a basic understanding of values and edges and creating a sense of form and a sense of light. Then you moved on into cast drawing. So basically what you do then is you take a plaster cast of a classical sculpture, and you place it in a shadow box, and you arrange the lighting, you know, and you arrange the lighting so you get a good spectrum of values. But also you use the lighting to basically create a strong sense of form as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. The problem I see, or something that is a problem with bad figurative painting, is exactly that there's no volume there. There's no lighting. There's no director involved. In terms of how to focus the motif. But with the cast work, you are basically the lighting director in that sense. So you choose how you put it, you know, and then you find something where, okay, first of all, maybe you like the impression, you know, it looks it's pleasing to look at, you know, it has an aesthetic value when you look at the lighting. And usually what that means is also, if it looks good, usually it means that you have nice turning of form, you know, and the values and the shapes that are created by the form are easy to read. And you get maximum volume.
Exactly, you get maximum volume. Yeah. So you do that with you draw the cast. First you do it in charcoal, and then you do the last one with charcoal and white chalk on a toned paper. So you go from just charcoal to charcoal and white chalk. And the reason for that is that because after you've done that, then you move on to painting in grisaille.
All right.
So you basically use a mixture.
Which is two colors.
Yeah, what we used was basically I say basically a lot. Jesus. You use lead white, and then you use a mixture of ivory black and raw umber.
Right.
Because the thing is, when you mix white with black, it has a tendency to go very blue. And if you use it just with umber, obviously you won't get enough. Like the darks will not be dark enough. So what we did in the Florence Academy is that you take black and umber and mix it together. So even when the value starts becoming lighter and grayer, you don't get this nasty bluish gray. It's actually a very sort of warm and neutral gray, I would say, much more neutral than you would get if you just use black for the grays.
And in a sense, you paint with one cool color and one warm color then. And white and this mixture.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I would say there's a little bit of different philosophy, but I always recommend it when I was teaching. I always recommend it because some people say you should think about temperature when you do the cast paintings, and my view was that it's complicated enough to just start dealing with paint and mixing paint and everything. Okay. So I usually recommend it like don't care about temperature, just get a neutral dark tone and then the white, and then you just
like you paint with chalk and charcoal.
Yeah, exactly. So it's basically a monochrome, you know. You don't care about temperature.
Right.
And then when you're done with the cast work, so also important to say is that when you for instance when you paint the cast in grisaille, you also paint the model in grisaille.
Right. Okay.
So whatever you're doing for the sort of studio work, like your own personal little studio space. Like the Borg and the cast work, you're always doing something like you're doing the same thing with the model,
right?
So that it's a sort of cohesive. So when you jump from this step here, you jump to the same step, you know, in the model work. So from grisaille you go to still lifes in limited palette, and at the same time then you do the figure in the limited palette, and eventually you do still lifes and portraits in full palette.
Right.
So you know, you don't just use ochre, red, black and white, but you use maybe ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, maybe chrome yellow, and you know, maybe alizarin crimson. So you extend the palette a little bit just to get more richness. And yeah.
So you, when you do this grisaille, the purpose is to be able to paint, but still focus more, almost solely on the drawing, so that the drawing sits well.
Yeah.
Before you start introducing really the painterly qualities.
Yeah.
But I guess you don't think too much about thick and thin and strokes and that when you're doing grisailles.
Some people did, and I remember as a teacher, some students would always ask me like, "Is this painterly enough?" And you know, being the grumpy teacher, I've always said, "Don't care about that now. You know, care about just getting the drawing and the values and the edges right."
Right.
Because it's like drawing, values, and edges are the three big ones. I mean, with color, you have much more. You know, color is much more subjective, and also way more flexible. You know, you can key things in color quite differently, you know, from one painter to the other, but it still looks correct, you know, because it's just how the colors relate to each other. But also the painterly qualities. I never recommended people to work on painterly qualities until the very end of their training, which is like the end of the third year, basically.
Right. So these are the three basic years.
Yes.
And so tell us a little bit about the ideals then at the Florence Academy. I mean, in terms of what painters were emphasized as ideals.
Yeah, it's interesting because
examples to follow.
Yeah, it's interesting because Florence Academy is a school that has. I mean, what they try to do is that they try to establish a tradition. You know, the 19th century academic tradition. But most of that knowledge was lost. So when Daniel Graves founded, I hope he agrees with this if he ever hears this, that he really had this like really strong ambition to create, you know, a new curriculum for classical realistic painting and drawing. And he had a lot of information, but he didn't have every information. There was still, so basically it's like, so I think it was almost like laying a puzzle, you know. You have certain things, you know, okay, this works, this we know, this we know, this we know, but then there was like puzzle, you know, pieces of the puzzle missing. And so what's happened with Florence Academy over the years, from when I started 20 years ago, is that I think they started finding because, you know, every student who comes through and who develops like really high skills, obviously everyone is an individual and everyone has, I mean, no one works exactly the same. Their temperament is different, you know, maybe their heroes in painting are different. So like the students that would really grow and reach a high level of work, they would all sort of come in with their own experiences. And I guess they also had their, you know, their own sort of heroes in painting and things like that. So I think Florence Academy has been able to sort of fill in more pieces of the puzzle as they went along, because the school is not exactly the same now as it was when I started. Because when I started, the two main heroes that we looked at for basically this is what we're trying to do was Jerome and Bouguereau.
Right.
Those were the two painters that was talked about over and over and over again.
Yeah. So Jerome is, I guess, his most famous painting is the gladiator.
Yeah.
Who waits for the word from the audience.
He waits for the thumb. Yeah.
And then you have Bouguereau here.
Yeah. So, but at the same time, I think because everyone always talked about, you know, like Titian and Rembrandt, but Titian and Rembrandt work was an enigma. You know, like no one.
Right.
At least if I remember correctly, no one could say this is the way they did it. You know?
Right. So what Grace tried to do was to find some secure vantage point.
Yeah, basically something where you could have an objective view and say like, look, this we know,
Okay.
And if you learn this, it produces good results.
Yeah.
You know.
So if you so tell us a little bit about this then. What I mean, Bouguereau, as an academic painter, what in this is the what was the interest of Florence Academy in, for example, a painting like this?
I think the interest with Bouguereau is his drawing, like his line work, his line drawing basically is impeccable, even though even in painting. I mean, I'm not talking about his drawings, I'm talking about his paintings. Yeah. Really strong drawing, perfect understanding of values, good understanding of color. Maybe not the strongest colorist who ever lived, you know, but he never does anything that looks ugly. Like he has a very sort of, looking at his images, everything is just very harmonious all the time. Very strong sense of lighting, and something that Bouguereau often get accused of is that they think that his forms are always very soft. You know, it almost looks like you've taken a fan brush and sort of, you know, almost like airbrushed his paintings. But the interesting thing is actually when you go up close to Bouguereau paintings, at least the ones I've seen, if you get up really close, all the values, all the color values, are in a specific shape. So you can see a woman, you know, let's say with a back, so it's like this big, round, soft form, and at the first glance you think it's almost, you know, airbrushed quality on it. But when you get up close to it, you see that every brushstroke is a shape.
Right. Okay.
It's just that the color values are so extremely close together that when you step away from it, they blend. But when you get up close to it, you see the definition between them.
Right.
So he actually paints in a much more mosaic-like style, you know, mosaic in the terms of like building up shapes of values and colors that create form. He does that much more than most people think. So his sense of form is also extremely strong. And lighting, I mean, it's I think that Bouguereau is probably, in terms of academic technical skills, he's, at least in my, I mean, not everyone would probably agree, but I don't know, but I think he's probably, I would say he's pretty much the peak of academic skill in painting.
Right, yeah.
His subject matter is a different deal, you know, because like his work is often very pretty. He has done some more sort of darker images as well that feel more, what do you call it? There's more drama in them.
Yeah.
But very often you have these sort of like very pleasant pictures, but his technique is impeccable.
At some point you studied with Odd Nerdrum also.
Yeah. There was...
so how was that simultaneous contrast?
Yeah, so what I did is that I did my 3 years in Florence, so I went through the whole program, and then I graduated in the... let's see, I think it was Christmas 2001. That's when I was done with my training. I went back to Sweden and I looked at my work and said, okay, I'm finally good enough to contact Odd Nerdrum. So I put together, in those days, you know, you couldn't send images so easily by email. So I just had basically some photos taken of my work. So it'd be like portraits and figures and maybe some landscapes. And I put them together in a letter where I just explained to Odd, like, I've been following your work for years and I've been to the Florence Academy, really admire your work, you know, and it would be really good to, you know, if I could come and study with you. And I sent it off. Super scared, obviously, because my worst fear was that a letter would come back, you know, saying, no, I'm sorry, there's no hope for you. So I was sitting there. So I was definitely, it was like a man waiting for his death sentence. I was sitting at home being super afraid, super scared. And I don't think that was intentional. Maybe it was, I think it was just by sort of, because, you know, like when you're running a school like here, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on and it's easy for some certain things to just, oh, we forgot about that. Yeah. So if I would have had to wait for like a month or something, I think I would have, you know, I've been climbing the walls or something in my apartment. But I actually got an answer back 2 days later. So I sent it in, let's say I sent it in on a Tuesday, and I got a letter back, I think on Thursday or Friday.
Wow. Saying,
you know, and it was from Ture. It said like, yeah, Odd likes your work. You can come over for Easter. And that's when first time I came over here was Easter 2002.
Right.
So yeah, I was lucky. I just had to wait. Was it 2 or 3 days?
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So okay. How then was coming from the Florence Academy to Odd Nerdrum studio, seeing the way of working? What was the?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, it was an amazing experience to finally, meet this person who had inspired me to really go through all of this training, and his very what do you call it, like compelling imagery, that had been going on in my mind for a long time. So coming here was obviously super inspiring. But what I'm glad about was that because the way that Odd works, I mean, obviously with his experience and his talent, he has really no restrictions in terms of technique.
Right.
I mean, I think he can start the painting in a way that to someone that has limited experience, it would make no sense whatsoever. Like, why does he start? Like, I remember, I can give you a good example. He started it was the first painting I saw when Odd painted. It was a blank canvas. It was just the imprimatura, the gray surface. Yeah. And then he was going to paint this woman who was she had a bow on her back, so it was almost like a portrait that was in a landscape. And I remember when he started that painting, and it just took he had a big blob of sort of salmon pink on the palette, and he just dipped his fan brush in this. And then he just painted a big pink egg on the canvas. That was the very first thing. And then he stabbed the fan brush in pure black, and then he just did 2 dots like for the eyes. And I was looking around like, is this the candid camera? I was like, because it looked so bizarre. It's just this pink egg with 2 dots. I was like, what the hell is going on here? And then he kept working on it, and you know how he works.
Priceless.
Yeah, and he's just sort of, he's working away and he's talking at the same time. And I was sitting there, and this was after 3 years of Florence Academy, so I knew some stuff.
It wasn't side size.
No, it wasn't side size either. And I was sitting there watching, and then after like 20 minutes, I was like, I think I have better starts than that, So I was like, oh. So I was almost getting a little bit cocky, right? And then he kept working away, and he was talking at the same time. And then after like an hour and a half or something, there was a break or something. And by then I was almost crying, because all of a sudden he'd taken this pink egg and it just developed this into this amazing, amazing form, amazing drawing, amazing color. Like everything was just there. And the thing was, I couldn't see how it happened. It was just, you look at it and it doesn't make sense. And all of a sudden there's one brush stroke and it's like, oh my God, it's there.
So in some way you could say that it's almost the opposite approach than in the Florence Academy, in the sense that it doesn't secure the form.
Yeah,
He develops the form as he goes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the benefit of having the training with the Florence Academy, because otherwise I would have been super confused, like seeing that. Right. Because I understood looking at it, okay, so he's doing everything at the same time.
Right.
He's drawing and he's thinking about the color and the atmosphere and the form and the shapes and the edges, everything at the same time. Yeah. So it wasn't broken up in very clear steps like Florence Academy would do.
But this is great. I mean, this is exactly what you set out to do. You have to be good enough first to be able to study with him, so that you are able to understand what he's doing.
Yeah. Because I think if I would have come to Odd before I went to Florence Academy, I think I would have been very confused, because when you're on that level of painting, you don't have to follow any rules. and for a young person, I think for young people, it's more important, you need to understand the rules, So, I mean, I think for some people, obviously it works, but I'm not sure it would have worked for me.
I've seen, I think I mentioned this to Boris Kohler, painters who saw Odd Nerdrum turn more, his technique more coarse, more the late Rembrandt, late Titian. Mm-hmm. And then they went directly to that, and it just fell apart. Yeah, that's the thing with painting very loosely. I mean, it's probably the most difficult thing you can do. Right.
Because the balance of it just disintegrating and falling apart or holding together, I mean, it's like balancing on a knife's edge. I mean, it's...
So that's a real value in the Florence Academy education, this security of form.
Yeah, I think a security of form, but also understanding, I think a really good thing that Florence Academy does is that it breaks down all the qualities that needs to be in a painting. But it's not this sort of like mushed together thing, but it's like, okay, it has to have good drawing. Okay, is the drawing correct? Okay, check, check, the drawing is good. The values need to be correct. Are the values good? Okay, check, that's good. Are the edges good? Okay, well, the edges are good, fine. Are the colors good? So you can break it down.
Right.
And the good thing about that is that you can look at work and you can say, okay, the drawing is really good. The values are really good. The colors are good. But your edges are completely off. You need to work on your edges because handling of edges is obviously where the form, really, the illusion of form happens. So the good thing about that is that you can pinpoint, you can look at an image that doesn't work and the person doing it might not know why it doesn't work. But if you have that sort of like breaking down all the different elements that need to be right, then you can say, well, it's the edges that don't work. The rest is fine. If you fix the edges, then you can keep working on it.
And in terms of composition then, because obviously if there's one thing people think about when it comes to Odd Nerdrum, it's composition, narrative.
Yeah.
So was that, how was that studying with Odd Nerdrum and seeing that?
No, I thought it was really inspiring because, and also I saw how he was completely merciless with his work, and how he anything to get the composition right, to make the image right, and just see how he could scrape down like a life-size figure that was beautifully painted, but it's in the wrong place, or there was something that bothered him about it, and then he would just scrape it down. So like being so merciless, and foremost, I would say fearless in the work, because I think that's a very hard thing also as a painter. As you mature, you get more fearless, obviously, because you can fix anything. But especially as a young student, you get it's a big risk of becoming very anal with what you actually have on the canvas. I mean, like it's always fun. Like when I was teaching in the FAA, for instance, it was always fun to see. You could almost sometimes do it as a test to see the psychology of a student. Because they would have a painting and they thought that everything, if they moved something a millimeter, everything would fall apart. Yeah. And you would just like, can I borrow your palette? And you would just take their palette and you would just paint on their painting. Yeah. And you would blur those edges that they thought were so, perfect or whatever, and they weren't. And you painted over it, and you can just see their face like sort of, becoming completely pale in the face, because in their mind you were ruining their work. Yeah. But really, what you were doing is that you were making the changes necessary so they could keep working on it. Because it's very easy, I think, as a young painter. If you don't have enough guidance, it's very easy to sort of get very locked into the painting and well, basically, the old expression, kill your darlings, it's a cliche expression, but it's so true though. And I think it's very important for to learn at an early age that, you can destroy anything, and like you can paint over everything, scrape it down and start over. It doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is the image when it's done. But it's a maturing thing. And I think not everyone, I think the issue that people have with that is like it's less and more in some people. But I remember me struggling with that, like if you had a perfect outline of an arm, for instance, and then, why would I want to, get rid of that outline? But it's a maturing thing.
But then you have, the striking thing about you and, your works in oil. I remembered when you had painted the burning horse, and I don't know, it doesn't come out good enough, I think, in the reproduction, even though it's beautiful.
It's hard to reproduce.
How you manage to get that extreme coolness of the warmth when it's where it's hottest.
Yeah.
And
there's actually like greens and blues inside the heat here, like inside. Right. So.
And then you have this immense drama. Then this is really storytelling and painterliness coming together. Is this something then that you started doing? I guess it's a superfluous question. After you had finished the Florence Academy, like how was that? I mean,
yeah, I think I mean, especially when I mean, I knew even before I went to Florence Academy that my biggest sort of heroes in painting were like you know, Rembrandt and Odd Nerdrum and Zorn to a certain extent, Ilya Repin as well, and all of those painters have a much more sort of painterly and they work much more with textures and things like that.
Right.
But my focus was that when I was in school, I worked academically, you know, so I learned that from point A to Z, and I knew exactly what it was about. But then when I started doing my own work after being a student, then I started like venturing into these other fields of working more painterly, loosen things up. You know.
That was basically your plan all along.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, even though I have huge respect for someone like Bouguereau, I mean, it's just having that technical skill, I think is mind blowing. But that was never the way I wanted to work. You know,
right.
I mean, it's almost like you.
You didn't set out to be an academic painter.
No, not really. I mean, it's the same thing as. You know, you can respect something. I mean, let's say, like in music, for instance. Let's say someone really likes, you know, jazz. I mean, I hate jazz. I think it's awful, right? But I can respect that. You know, okay, well, they're doing jazz, but you know, they're really good musicians. It's not for me, but they really know what they're doing.
Right.
So you can respect it, even though you don't necessarily have to you know, be an admirer of it in that sense. And for me, I think Bouguereau is a good example. I mean, he is amazing painter, but it's not really what I wanted, the imagery that I wanted to do. So.
And I'm also asking about it because I think you painted this when you were an academic director at the Florence Academy in Gothenburg, right?
Yeah, I think it was one of my last years. I think this one is from 2012. Yeah.
Because this is like the segue into talking about what you're doing now with the gaming industry, illustration. I mean, would you call yourself an illustrator? Is that the sort of the basic baseline here?
I don't know. I think I'm a weird hybrid. I mean,
okay, we'll call you a weird hybrid.
Yeah, I'm a weird hybrid. Yeah.
Okay, but before we get to that, tell us about that period with the Florence Academy as an academic director. Or rather, the point is not the Florence Academy, but the position of being an academic director.
Yeah.
Because of course this is, I think, something that a lot of painters and you know, anyone who wants to live off of creating something deal with, having to, you know, focus on the work, but then having to have a job.
Yeah.
So
it's a reality for a lot of people.
If you could sort of walk us through fairly quickly how that was and why you left.
Well, the thing is, I mean, I was teaching for quite a few years in the Florence Academy.
Before that, in
Florence,
right.
I was teaching for a couple of years in Florence before I was asked to become the academic director in Sweden for the new school. And I enjoyed teaching immensely. I thought it was really, it was very stimulating. You know, a lot of people can say in a very sort of, you know, being, you know, trying to be very, I'm so generous. You know, I really like teaching. You know, but maybe they don't. You know, it's just a way to you know, to seem like a generous person. But I genuinely like teaching. I really like the sort of dialogue and figuring out problems, you know, together with students.
Yeah, because you learn from it.
Yeah, you learn from it. And actually one of the things that Daniel Graves told me when I started teaching, which was so true, he said, like, when you start teaching and you start guiding other people, then that's the first time you will realize what you know and what you don't know.
Right.
Because if you're not able to explain it to another person, you don't know it. I was like, that sounds weird. You know, it's like if I can do it, obviously I know. You know, but it was so true because I remember then, you know, when you stand in front of a student work, for instance, and you're trying to help them the best you can, and all of a sudden I have this sort of intuition. If I would do it on my own work, I'd just do it, just using intuition or getting a hunch or whatever you want to call it. But you can't really say that to a student. You know, you have to have some clear advice to a student, and all of a sudden you have to sort of find the vocabulary for everything that you're talking about. So even if things have not been, even if you didn't have words for something before, being a teacher forces you to have words for what you're trying to communicate. I mean, otherwise you can't really teach. So he told me that you will realize what you know and what you don't know. And it was so true, because then if you were standing in front of a student and you wanted to say something but you didn't have the words for it, you would have to like go back and think about it, like actually why do I want the person to do this? And then this is why, and then you would find the trigger sort of to explain things. So anyway, teaching I thought was really rewarding, and what I did was I was teaching, I think it was 1.5 days a week, which I think is a very, very good balance for me. And I think this is something that is, I think it's very individual. I think some people probably wouldn't mind teaching 5 days a week. Some people might actually think that teaching is more fun than painting. For me, it never was like that. Like I always wanted to create imagery, like making images. That's my main drive. Like when I get up in the morning, what do I want to do? I want to make images. And when I was doing 1.5 days a week, that was the perfect balance, because you could come in with a lot of energy, you could teach for 1.5 days, and be very sort of focused, energetic, hopefully, and helpful as a teacher, and being involved, very involved with their work, because you had so much time working on your own work. So as you're working on your own work and you're trying to figure things out, and you come to the student and you might see that, oh my God, they actually have a similar problem, so then you can discuss with the student. And very often you also learn from your student, because I mean, even if you're a teacher, okay, you have quite a bit of knowledge, but you don't have all the knowledge. And all of a sudden the student has figured out something that you never figured out, and then you learn from them. So it's definitely give and take. I think starting a school is a different beast though, because all of a sudden if you're the director of the school, you get involved with the government and the different programs, student bureaucracy and all those things, and again, naivety, being naive, I completely underestimated how much time that would take, much time and energy.
Was that just in a startup phase, or then throughout the years?
I thought it was just going to be the startup phase, which I thought was 2 years. It's going to be 2 years of doing all of this, but then it's sort of like going to trickle out. But I mean, it's not like that. If you're running a school is basically like running a company. You constantly have to. And I had amazing colleagues. I mean, like I started the school together with Andreas Birat, who's still
who is academic director now.
Yeah, he's the academic director now. And we worked really well together, and to be really honest, he took most of the work, like the sort of practical work. So it could have been much worse, for me. But in the long run, it was just, I don't know. It just took too many hours away a week, I think.
Ibsen, Henrik Ibsen, was the director of a theater in Norway in his younger years, and then he stopped doing that. And then afterwards, another colleague of his is going to be a director too, and he just warns him and says, doing that kind of work is like an abortion. It's like,
yeah.
Don't do it.
Yeah.
So I mean, is that sort of what made you lose interest in being there? All the bureaucracy involved with it?
What started sort of trickling through in my own work was that I was starting to, and this then obviously comes back to what I enjoyed as a child, with the role-playing games and Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and all these kind of things, was that in my own work, in my studio, I started to make these more sort of imaginative paintings.
Right.
Like the burning horse that you were talking about, for instance. That was one of them. And I did a bunch of other ones as well. And I started like shifting, and I realized that, okay, I don't want to paint another still life in my whole life. I just got so fed up with still lifes. and in the gallery work.
But you still took it quite far with heart on the plate.
Yeah. Well, that was a still life that I could actually feel excited about, but it's not really a still life. It's more sort of like just a.
It's still it's turning into narrative.
Yeah, a little bit. One of the defining moments was actually we had a show somewhere internationally. I think it was probably in Florence, and I had like two paintings in the show, and one was the burning horse, and one was the one of Lilith sitting there.
Right.
And they're approximately the same size. They're quite big. They're not huge, but they're quite large. And I remember like looking at them, I was like, wow, I think these are actually the two best paintings I've ever done. And it's rare, as a painter and being creative, it's rare that you feel that, you're always self-critical. But I was looking at them and I was saying like, objectively, no, this is not bad. It's probably the two best works I've ever done.
Most definitely.
Yeah, and I got a lot of praise for them. People said, oh, this is amazing. Everyone was talking about the burning horse. It's so fantastic. Yeah, well, what happened? Like 6 months later, I'm sitting in my studio and Lilith and the burning horse are wrapped in bubble wrap in my studio, unsold, collecting dust.
Right.
So I'm just sitting there, okay, they're just taking up space in my studio. I mean, so it just felt like this whole gallery world where certain types of paintings are usually easier to sell. And it just felt like, okay, the imagery that I want to do is not really wanted in the gallery world. I mean, there might be one occasional buyer that that likes it, but it's not the standard for sure. So
I mean, we haven't been talking about that, but I guess you got fed up with sort of doing, portraits, still lifes, and these things that could sell. And on the other hand, of course, also being tired of working, with too much bureaucracy, and then on the third hand, wanting to do narrative work, but experiencing that it didn't sell.
Yeah. So it was like a triple strike.
Right. So what made you? I mean, you didn't. Not only did you resign as an academic director at the Florence Academy, but you stopped painting and you went into the gaming industry. How did that occur?
At the same time, actually, my colleague in Gothenburg, Andreas, had said for quite a few years that I should try to work digitally with a Wacom tablet.
Right.
Because he before he went to the Florence Academy and learned classical painting and drawing, he was he was in advertisement and those sort of things. So he had that background before he came to Florence Academy. And he was much more sort of in tune with digital work and digital imagery. And he said like, oh, you should try the Wacom tablet. I think you might like it, especially him seeing the work that I was doing. So one day I just decided, well, okay, I'm just going to buy one and try it out.
Right.
And I remember bringing it home, just trying to figure out, okay, this is the pen, and okay, this is how it works in Photoshop. And I started drawing with it. And the first image I did, I actually still have the very first image I did digitally. And it's heartbreaking to see how bad it is compared to my work in oil, because it's a different beast. Like when you work digitally, obviously everything in painting, obviously that's in your head, and you can utilize that when you work digitally. But just the sort of technical aspect of it, how it works and functions, and
right.
the tactility or tactile qualities of everything. It took a while to get over that. But I started working with it, and I did the first image, and I realized, oh my God, this looks terrible. Why does it look this terrible? And then I remember doing the second image, and I figured, okay, I'm just going to pretend that I'm doing this in oil. So I'm going to work exactly like I would do on the canvas. So I would sort of have the same background as a sort of imprimatura. And just paint brushstrokes over it.
Same progress.
Same progress, basically. It's just that it's on a screen instead of a canvas.
Right.
And I did that, and I was like, wow, that's a lot better. So I was not pretending, okay, I have to work digitally, but I just worked in the way that I was comfortable with. And it looked better digitally, the process that I used. So a lot of the process you could actually just transfer into digital. Obviously, there's a lot of tricks and stuff that you can do that makes it easier to create images fast, and also you have post-processing things that you can. So there's a lot of tricks you can use, which is even more beneficial if you're looking for the best image possible. But I started making all these images just practicing. And by this time I was still the director of the school in Gothenburg. So I was teaching several days a week. And I was standing in my studio. I think for the first 3 months I was standing in my studio, working in oil, but I was basically just looking at the clock, like when can I go home and start working digitally at home.
Right. So
it started becoming like, oh, I got this doctor's appointment, I got to leave now early, and then I took off, and then I went home and I started working, digitally at home. Right. Because the fantastic thing that happened to me is that when I switched to digital, and I should also mention that obviously, like in the digital painting, in the concept and illustrator world that you have digitally, there's a million images on the internet, and you have these really good websites. Like in those days, I think the main one was called CG Hub, where you could just see tons of images from, professionals working in gaming, working in movies, working in illustration, and everyone was just like uploading everything. So there was tons of references to look at, to see what could actually be accomplished digitally. And looking at that, I just realized, oh my God, this is really what I want to do. And I started to work that way. So when I switched digitally, my subjects switched instantly as well.
Right.
Because I started making illustrations rather than paintings.
Right.
So I started making these illustrations just for stories that I've had in my head for a while, and they could be related to sci-fi or horror, whatever it was. And I sent them away to one of my old role-playing friends. Like he's still a good friend today. And he's always been very blunt and very direct with like he just gives it to you, the way he sees it. And so it's like, oh wow, you've been working digitally for a week and your imagery is way more interesting now than what you ever did in oil. So then I was like, oh yeah, maybe he's right. But for a couple of months I was still teaching at the school, and I was basically just looking for an excuse to go home and practice the digital work in the evening, and I was working over the weekends intensely as well. Yeah.
And I was thinking, when we're talking about what constitutes a good story, and you and I have been talking about this a bit before. The whole idea of the mythic qualities, archetypical qualities of the image.
Yeah.
So, and one thing that really struck me when you were talking about making these images as a boy and working with Dungeons and Dragons and these things, you used the phrase to create non-existent worlds.
Yeah.
And when it comes to fantasy and sci-fi, I think one of the things that you really highlighted was that, and that was really a striking formulation. The within fantasy, within science fiction, you at least have the option, the possibility of becoming more timeless.
Yeah.
Because you're not bound to historical time. There's no specific time to illustrate if you have thrown everything out in a complete.
Yeah, I mean it's. If you think about, like the example that we talked about early on, like Star Wars, for instance.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason that picture is there.
And this is from the first movie that was made, right?
No, it's from Empire Strikes Back.
It's the second movie.
So it's the second movie ever made, yeah. And in my mind, it's really the first Star Wars movie that came out is amazing in its own rights. But I think when George Lucas made it, because it was so uncertain if it was going to become a success or not, he made it a self-contained story. So I think it was really in the second movie when the actual story and the emotional drama qualities started happening.
Right.
Like the first one is more sort of like a space opera. It has some serious elements to it as well, but I think in the second one is really when the story started taking off, and it actually became interesting in terms of drama.
The thing that really I watched this movie is, again, I'll be preparing for this, so it's been quite entertaining.
Yeah.
Watching Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. And it says in the beginning, in a galaxy far, far away, a long time ago. No, how is it formulated?
A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
Right, right. Yeah. And the strange thing is that these guys are working with laser sabers and with spaceships and high technology. And this is something that happened, not, I mean, really quite far away, but also quite far away in time.
Yeah.
And that, when you do that, you really can create a timeless situation. Yeah. Even though they're working with this high technology. It sort of becomes a mythical situation in any case.
Yeah, I mean, I would even argue that, and I think a lot of people do, that Star Wars is not really science fiction. It's actually more fantasy than science fiction.
Right.
Because science fiction usually takes place, science fiction usually builds on where we are now as a human civilization, and then where are we in 500 years, or in 10,000 years even.
Right.
Whereas Star Wars doesn't care about any of that. Star Wars is just, that happened somewhere in the universe a long time ago.
Yeah.
And I think that's the brilliant thing that George Lucas did with it, because like you say, you strip away everything that attaches potentially the story to, us as humans and human culture, maybe hundreds of years ago or in 100 years. You just strip away everything. You create your own world, your own universe with its own rules, far, far away. So there's no attachments whatsoever to any, and like basically politics of today and the values that are today, like all of that just goes out the window, and you create your own universe and your own set of rules.
Yeah, and that really has stuck with me when you were talking about Star Wars. I mean, I hadn't thought much about Star Wars or Lord of the Rings either, but I suddenly realized that aspect really strongly. Yeah. That. And watching the Empire Strikes Back, and there are some really touching scenes there. That's the amazing thing. It's not all action and sort of, that's another thing. This Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, you have a seriousness. There's no irony whatsoever there. It's just there's a bit more of that in Star Wars than in Lord of the Rings, but still that there are really gripping, serious scenes. Yeah. And I think that the whole feeling is, as I said of your work too, that life is extremely important, and that's one thing that was really it kind of opened my eyes in some way that. You can always, like I was told also, I made these dead people, the watercolors of dead people that have been dead for like 200 years. And in one exhibition, it was a review, and I was mentioned in like a couple of sentences, basically being written off as my work belonging to the fantasy department. So and of course that is really a timeless situation.
You could have been a concept artist for the Mummy movie or something.
Right. Well, maybe if they call. But anyways, there's no irony. There's no tongue in cheek. Everything is important. This task, this mission is really, really important for us to do.
Yeah. It's super serious.
Yeah.
And I think just going back to this thing with the timelessness. Like we said, if you have a fantasy universe or a sci-fi universe, you can strip away everything that is basically just noise. Yes. Because if you have to set something in present day, or maybe just even in history. I mean, if you go far back enough in history, obviously no one really knows how it was. So then you have some you can sort of make things up. But when you strip everything away, I mean, in fantasy and sci-fi, then you can basically, the story you want to tell, you can make it so condensed and sort of very extremely clear. So you know exactly what the stakes are. You know exactly, you know, who is good and who is bad, or not necessarily just who's good and who is bad, but all the sort of noise that could just be distracting for the problem or in the story is stripped away. So you can just focus on the stuff that you, as a storyteller, think is the most important. But with the hero's journey, it's very interesting how, if you look at, originally I was thinking about, you know, Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and The Matrix,
Right.
because all of those three follow the hero's journey. It's also called the monomyth. They follow it like really by the book. So the thing is, like in all those stories, I mean, it's basically the same story. It's just that it's in a different setting, and the characters look different, and they have different names. But the archetypes are exactly the same in all of them. So if you take the, you know, the first part of the hero's journey, for instance, is just called The Ordinary World. And that's when we as a viewer or reader, when we meet the hero, and the hero is a normal person, you know, just like us. You know, he's not a hero. He's a normal guy or girl. So in the case of Star Wars, for instance, you know, you have Luke, and he's working on his uncle's farm on Tatooine. He's walking around. He's dreaming of something else. You know, he's like a peasant boy, but he's dreaming of something. But he's basically bored where he is. So he's a dreamer, but he doesn't have a future really. In Lord of the Rings, it's similar. It's not exactly the same, but it's basically Frodo living in the Shire. He doesn't seem as bored as Luke, but he's living a very mundane life. You know, he's going to the pub, he's drinking pints with his buddies, and he's, you know, singing and having a good time. And in The Matrix, you know, Neo, who is the protagonist, he's a bored programmer working for a computer company. So that's the ordinary world. You're presented. You're introduced to the hero in the sort of life situation that the hero is used to. So that's what they've been doing for a long time.
And that the audience can relate to.
You can always relate to, yeah, because they're like you and me, right?
Yeah.
And then what happens usually then is that you have the call to adventure. And what that is that like the first little hint that the hero will not be able to like stay in this sort of secure life that he has. Something is about to change. You don't know exactly what yet, but you're getting hints that something is about to change. And in Star Wars, it's a scene where the droid R2-D2 presents a hologram. It's a hologram that's being projected, and Luke doesn't know it's Princess Leia. He doesn't know her yet in the story. It's just this anonymous girl in a hologram asking a character called Obi-Wan Kenobi for help, and he doesn't know who Obi-Wan Kenobi is either. So it's this sort of enigma. What is this beautiful girl? He doesn't know by then that they're sister, like they're siblings either. So, but that's a different story. But like she's beautiful and she's asking for help, and she mentions this character name. So that's the call to adventure. So you basically understand, okay, something is going on and things are going to change. In Lord of the Rings, it's the scene where Gandalf, Gandalf starts understanding. He doesn't say it out loud, but he starts understanding there might be something with this ring that is very dangerous and very important. And he doesn't want to take any chances, so he just gives the ring to Frodo and says, like, keep it secret, keep it safe, and then he takes off. So Frodo takes the ring to keep it secret and to keep it safe. And in The Matrix, there's I don't have to go through all of the scenes, but you have a similar scene in The Matrix as well. And like it is with like humans in general, most of us people, we don't like change in our life, and I think that's one of the reasons why the hero's journey is so important and resonates with so many people, because we want things to be, you know, I'm not talking about Star Wars now, I'm talking about like real life. Most of us want our lives to be the way they've always been.
Right.
You know, we don't want to age. You know, we don't want our parents to die. We don't want to lose our job, whatever it is. You know, so change is very often threatening to the human existence. But what happens then? Consequently, what happens in the hero's journey is that the hero doesn't want this change to happen, whatever is coming.
Right.
So Luke says, when he has met Obi-Wan, which is the mentor, which is the archetype. You know, you have Gandalf in Lord of the Rings being the mentor, so they're basically the same character. And you have Morpheus in the Matrix. But basically Luke says, I can't go with you on this adventure, you know, because I have to stay here and be a farm boy. And Frodo is afraid of taking the ring, so he offers the ring to Gandalf, saying, like, you have to take care of it. So it's called the refusal of the call. So it's basically the hero doesn't want change in his life, like most of us don't. And there's a scene in the Matrix which does this as well. And then you move on, and the hero, it's called basically crossing the threshold. And that's the first time that the hero steps out of his comfortable life, either by force or by his own will. Yeah. He basically takes his first step into the adventure.
It really struck me, that example from Lord of the Rings. Mm-hmm. Could you really highlight that? Because that's...
Yeah, the thing is, I can't remember if it's in the book. I think it might be only in the movie, but it doesn't matter, because I mean...
Storytelling.
Yeah, storytelling. There's a scene when Frodo, the main protagonist, and his sort of trusted friend and sidekick, he's more than a sidekick, it's basically, I mean, it's the guy who's gonna, they're best buddies. And they're going on this thing where they know, okay, we have to take the ring to the volcano, you know, Mount Doom in Mordor. They have a long trip ahead of them, but they're sort of like moving across the landscape, you know, very nice views. And all of a sudden they're standing in the middle of a farm field, and they're both walking, and then Sam stops. And Frodo keeps walking for a while, and then he notices that, oh, where's Sam? And he looks back, and then Sam says, this is it. And he says, this is what? If I take one more step, it's the closest away from home that I've ever been.
Farthest away.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Yeah, the furthest away from home that I've ever been. Yeah, otherwise it would be the coward's journey. Yeah, you know. So he says, if I take one more step, it's going to be the furthest away from home I've ever been. So he even tell you straight up, like he has never been this far away from home anymore. He's going into unexplored territory, and he is on an adventure now. You know, so they're really like writing it on, you know, on your nose, really. And in the Matrix, you have this scene when Neo gets to choose, take the blue pill or the red pill.
Right.
And basically, you take the blue pill, you just go back to your boring life, you know, nothing ever happened. He decides to take the red pill, and then basically the reality, you know, the illusion of reality gets ripped apart, and he wakes up in this sort of like slimy, nasty pod.
So that's where the hero starts growing up.
Yeah, it's his first step into the supernatural world, you know. So it's like when the adventure starts, and then you have all these steps of trials and friends and enemies, you know, like in Star Wars, when like crossing the threshold in Star Wars is when Luke and Obi-Wan go into the cantina. They go to a town that's called Mos Eisley, because they have to get a flight from the planet, so they have to find a pilot with a ship, you know. And they meet Han Solo, and then it's like, oh, he seems sort of dodgy, you know, is he a friend or is he an enemy? And you know, like in the Matrix, you have trials, you know, because he has to practice martial arts and stuff like that. So there's trials as well. Mm. And in like Empire Strikes Back, like the part 2 of Star Wars, well, part 5, but it was the second one ever made. When Luke is training with Yoda, you know, he's also having all these trials because he's being trained as a Jedi. So he's going through all these tests, and some of the tests he you know, he's doing really well, and some of the tests he's failing. So you have, you know, with the hero's journey, you know, there's about 10-12 steps, you know, from point A to, you know, from beginning to end. But as an example, like Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and the Matrix, they all follow almost to the note, you know, exactly this pattern. And it works. And the funny thing is that every time we read one of those stories, or every time we see one of those stories in a movie, we like it, even though we've been told this story before, but we seem to forget that we've been told this story, and somehow it matters equally as much every time but it's just
because it deals with the fundamentals.
Yeah, it is the fundamentals, and it's always gripping.
Ultimately, if you take away, or let's say Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, if you take away the social. Speaking of that, social status of these things. Just look at how successful is this story and this story and this story. Then of course there are different aspects, but it's different. It's levels of storytelling. And that's really something you can get out of watching Star Wars or reading, for example, or watching Lord of the Rings.
And I think also there is a, let's just for the sake of argument agree that okay, you have high art, art, and then you have illustration and Star Wars, whatever, for those people who want to put them in like on a different level, right? But the interesting thing is that if you look at even Shakespeare, like some of the Shakespeare stories, I would say probably most of them also apply to the hero's journey.
Right.
And there's actually in Shakespeare is supposed to be like the peak of literature in the Western world. And there's so many similarities between Shakespeare and Star Wars, for instance. So what happens then? If you have Star Wars and Shakespeare is so much better than Star Wars, it's just, it's stupid entertainment. But they actually have more in common than maybe some other things, that's being produced. That
they have more in common than, for example, Matisse and Shakespeare.
Exactly. Yeah.
In terms of storytelling.
Yeah. Because I mean, if you look at Macbeth, for instance, like Macbeth gets a prophecy in the beginning. Are you going to become king and blah blah blah. With these 3 witches. It's the same thing in Star Wars. Like the guy who becomes Darth Vader originally is called Anakin Skywalker. Right. And he's also given a prophecy, he's going to become the person who mends the universe and brings peace and prosperity to the galaxy. And then you have, like in Hamlet, you have Hamlet, who is this young naive person, and his father is dead. And then you have the ghost coming. And mentoring him. And the mentor in that sense, like the ghost in Hamlet is almost like Obi-Wan in Star Wars. Right. Because Obi-Wan dies eventually, and then he comes back as a ghost, and he just gives him some information and some wisdom. So, then, okay, how many percent do they share? I mean, it's difficult to quantify, I guess, but there is way more similarities than I think that people would expect at the first glance.
Right. And when you're talking about I guess neither Hamlet nor Macbeth, at least not Macbeth, is your typical classical hero. But that's I think one thing I really wanted to hear you talk about then, in continuation of this, the modern versus the classical hero. Because this, depending on which one you choose, your story will either be completely a failure or a success in terms of really reaching the archetypical baseline.
Yeah. The thing is...
So what is a modern hero?
I mean, if you look at the modern heroes are, I would say, at best, they're anti-heroes. They're sort of, they're filled with flaws, which we all are. So let's put it this way. I think in some respect, maybe the modern heroes are more realistic. Maybe they are more like us in the sense that they have flaws, and they have sides that are good and they have sides that are bad.
So they're more naturalistic.
More naturalistic in a way, yeah. So like, if you take an example, like, I mean, even though I love the world of Game of Thrones, I think Game of Thrones is a fantastic, fantasy universe that was created. Interesting characters, interesting intrigues and everything. But unlike Star Wars, in Star Wars, it's very clear that, okay, Luke is good, Darth Vader is bad. Yeah. And in Game of Thrones, it's 50 Shades of Grey, It's one person is bad, and then it's like, oh, he's not bad, he's actually okay. Oh, then now he's bad again. Yeah. And I think that's fine, but I think the difference is that the classical hero is more sort of like an ideal. It's more like an inspiring example, right? To something that inspires you. I mean, it's like you know, you look at we don't even have to take Star Wars. You know, we can even take something like the Bible. You know, like Jesus, the story of Jesus. You know, and when he dies on the cross and all this, and when he's being tortured and all this. I mean, and I'm not like a religious person, but it's still a compelling story, because, I mean, the way, like in the sort of courageous way that he faces death at the end, that's the way that I wish that I would face death eventually when it happens. You know,
Right.
I just wish that could I be as calm and sort of resolute and courageous when it actually happens. You know, so it is inspiring. And with Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, you know, when he's being tempted by the dark side continuously, you know, like over and over, and he's really close to becoming like his father at the end, like he's close to joining the dark side, but he manages to like hold it together, and you know, and basically when you know, the most evil character in the whole universe, the Emperor, is trying to corrupt him at the end, he realizes what's going on, and he just throws his weapon down, and he goes all sort of like peaceful, you know, Buddhist, and said like, no, I'm not going to do this. So it's basically, do whatever you want with me. I don't care. I'm not going to obey you. And I think in terms of inspiring people, I think the classical hero is much stronger than the modern one. It might be easier to relate to the modern hero. But the classical hero, I think, is much more something that if you would what's it called in English, like aspire to be more like that, it's probably a better thing than to sort of be a hero that's 50 shades of gray, you know. And obviously, I mean, we have flaws enough as it is as human beings anyway. So I think, you know, to aspire to be something that doesn't have as many flaws, I think is probably a good thing.
Joakim Ericsson, thank you for coming to the Cave of Apelles.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for watching. Remember, you can support our channel at caveofapelles.com. I'll see you next month.